Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Walberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can grow your podcast authority, generate leads, and convert with ease. Today's tip is, don't treat your podcast like content. Treat it like the foundation of your authority. A lot of podcasters judge their show by downloads or likes. How many people listen this week? Is it growing fast enough? But that's not where your authority is actually built. Authority is built by how your thinking shows up, how clearly your thought leadership comes across, and how consistently people experience it. So let's walk through how a podcast, when done right, can really build authority. First, your podcast is a container for your thought leadership. This is where your ideas live. Not just your teaching, but your perspective, how you see the problem that you solve and the solution. What you believe most people get wrong. The ideas you'll repeat over and over because they matter and you believe in them. For example, if you're a leadership coach, your authority doesn't come from saying communication is important. It comes from how you explain why communication breaks down and how you approach fixing it. When you help your audience shift their perspective on the problem, you start to claim your authority on that topic. And a podcast gives you a place to develop those ideas over time instead of cramming them into short posts that disappear in a feed. Second, your podcast can get you into rooms you wouldn't otherwise be in. When you interview other experts or when you're invited onto other shows because of your podcast, you're doing two things at once. You're borrowing authority from people who already have it, and you're demonstrating your authority through the quality of your questions and insights. Think about it. If you're having a thoughtful conversation with someone who's well-respected in your industry, the listener doesn't separate you into host and expert. They hear you as peers in a meaningful conversation. That's powerful positioning. The third podcast benefit is how it strengthens your authority online. This is the part that a lot of podcasters don't connect. When you consistently publish episodes around a clear topic, your website starts to signal expertise to search engines, and now to AI answer engines as well. Your podcast episodes become data points that say, this person talks about this problem a lot and with depth. That matters far beyond downloads. This podcast is a perfect example of how that works. I've been consistently posting a podcast on the topic of podcasting to my website for the past 10 years, and the search engines have noticed. They rank me as an authority in podcast coaching. This is authority you earn over time with consistency and intention. You can't buy it. Okay, so far we've talked about how your podcast builds authority by being a container for your ideas, expanding your access to other experts, and strengthening your presence online. Now let's move into the human side of authority. Fourth, your podcast lets people hear you. If you want to be hired as a coach, consultant, or speaker, people want to know what you sound like. Not your credentials, not your website copy. They want to hear how you explain things, how you pace ideas, how confident and clear you are when you talk. A podcast gives people a front row seat to that experience. And often, by the time someone books a call, they already feel like they know you. And the fifth way a podcast can build authority, it forces clarity. Think about it. You can't have authority on a topic if you're all wishy-washy. Hosting a podcast forces you to organize your thinking. You can't hide behind vague language for very long. You have to decide what you stand for. You have to choose what ideas matter enough to repeat. That clarity doesn't just improve your podcast, it improves how referable you are. It helps your audience understand what you're known for. And then, when someone asks, do you know someone who helps with this? Your name is the first one they think about. Like, for example, if I say, let them, You instantly know I'm talking about Mel Robbins because she created clarity around that idea over the course of her book and podcast and is now the authority on that idea. Sixth, your podcast becomes a referable body of work. This is huge. Instead of explaining the same idea over and over to clients, prospects, and collaborators, you can say, I did a 15-minute episode on this exact topic. Go listen to episode 55 of my podcast. That body of work also becomes raw material for talks, for articles, for a future book. Some people write a book first and then start a podcast. Others use the podcast to develop the thinking that eventually becomes the book. Either way, authority compounds when ideas are documented over time. So at this point, your podcast is building authority through visibility, clarity, trust, and consistency. And here's the final piece. Number 7, it builds trust faster than almost anything else. When people listen to you regularly, the gap between knowing you and hiring you shrinks. They know your stories. They understand your background. They trust how you approach the problem they're struggling with. You may already have helped them get their first win. That's why podcast listeners convert faster and with greater ease. They're not meeting you for the first time on a sales call. They're continuing a conversation they've already been having with you for weeks or months. So when you step back and look at it, your podcast is doing a lot more than publishing episodes. So when you step back and look at it, your podcast is doing a lot more than publishing episodes. It's building authority by 1, housing your thought leadership. 2, positioning you alongside other experts. Number 3, strengthening your presence online. 4, letting people experience how you think and communicate. 5, forcing clarity around what you stand for. 6, creating a compounding body of work. And 7, accelerating trust with the right audience. Which brings us to the real takeaway. Don't treat your podcast like content. Treat it like infrastructure. Because when you do that, your authority doesn't just grow, it compounds. And I hope that's just the tip you need. If you want this kind of authority amplification for your podcast, or you're not sure your podcast is actually supporting your authority the way it should, book a free podcast coaching call with me. This is a private one-on-one call where we look at how your podcast is positioned, where it's doing heavy lifting already, and where you might be leaving authority on the table. Head to podcastperformancecoach.com and click the big orange button on the homepage. I've put a direct link to podcastperformancecoach.com in the show notes, so you can click that. Then click the orange button and book your free podcast coaching call right now. Why? Because I'm the authority on the subject. Google says so. I'll see you at podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Walberg.